Hey guys, Dr. Danny McLane here, ADIO Chiropractic Clinic in Libertyville, Illinois. Just wanted to come back to you today with another clinical piece, a little bit of framework. I know that we already did a video on kinetic versus isolated injury. That's basically where, the difference between isolated is like if a bowling ball drops on your foot versus if you, that's a isolated injury, right? Because it's just very small space. Versus if you step in a hole and twist your ankle, and then what happens from there. That would be more of a kinetic chain type of injury because it affects the entire body versus just one isolated spot. So now we're going to talk about it's sort of a riff on that same concept, but it's a little bit different because now we're talking about the symptoms of an injury, direct versus indirect. So today what I want to talk to you about just real quick is a direct symptom versus an indirect symptom. This happens a lot, especially with head injuries. It always surprised me when I first started learning about this stuff, how many issues can be a downline effect of a head injury. One of the really interesting things that I've seen is the Windsor autopsies, basically where they're, I think his name was Dr. Windsor. I don't quote me on that, but there was a guy who was a scientist. We'll just start with that. And he went through and he did autopsies. And he looked at disease pathology of an organ and was able to track that back to the spine. And in accounting for variability of the human system, it was 100% correlation across the board that he was able to find a direct evidence of spinal degeneration along with the diseased organ. So it didn't matter what the disease of the organ was. It was the it could have been cancer, it could have been a breakdown, it could have been a perforation of that organ. So basically what he found is that the organs die off if they're not connected properly to the nervous system, which, globally everybody's like, oh yeah, the nervous system controls everything, duh, right? And if you don't believe me, like imagine what happens when you take the brain out of a person. Everything stops working. So we get that at a basic level, but as you start to look at it deeper and deeper, people are like, oh, well, could my skin condition could be because of a nerve problem, or maybe this indigestion problem. One of the things that I see a lot, mostly because it's undiagnosed and it's usually untreated, and it's not something that automatically resolves itself. So those three things, meaning there's not a lot of other people looking for it. Anybody that does know about it doesn't really know what to do about it. Or at least this has been my experience. Obviously, if somebody else does know about it and they can fix it and they can find it, great. Then that just never shows up in my office. Maybe they were taken care of before they showed up here. But it's one of those sort of niche techniques that I picked up from a very small sector of a very small sector of what I already do. So basically what I've seen happens is a lot of people get a lot of indigestion, and this is where we start to talk about the indirect or an insidious consequence or symptom of an injury. One of the things that happens is, sure enough, if somebody gets whacked in the head, somebody slips and falls, whatever, a lot of times migraines come of that because it pinches the top and the bottom of the spinal cord. Or with the digestive thing, if that bone on the side of your head gets jammed up, it messes up the natural rhythm. Your head flexes and extends as you breathe. It pumps cerebral spinal fluid. I know that a lot of times in Western science, people are like, oh, no, that's not the case. But in German, in all the German literature and all the Italian literature, they've very, very well documented the fluctuations of the skull, and it pumps the cerebral spinal fluid around that nourishes your brain and spinal cord. So when that bone gets jammed up, it causes all kinds of problems. One of the most common problems it causes is hypohydrochloria, where basically the vagus nerve, if you're scientific or geeky like I am, that vagus nerve goes down to the stomach, and it tells the stomach to make enough stomach acid. And when that's not functioning properly, the stomach doesn't make enough stomach acid, and instead of breaking down your food chemically, you have to break it down mechanically. And when you have to break it down mechanically, obviously your stomach doesn't have teeth, so it just squeezes and squeezes and squeezes and squeezes, and that's when you get regurgitation. So a lot of times because of a head injury, we'll see reflux. Now, all in all, it's not good, but it gets worse than that. Because that reflux then means that you're not digesting your food properly. You don't have a high acid environment, so you're not absorbing your calcium or your iron properly. And I have a really interesting story to tell you about that, and we'll get to that in just a second. But calcium and iron only absorb well in a high acid environment, so long-term problems with that reflux will mean, especially if you're taking antacids, causes all kinds of problems, right? Because if the problem well defined, right? We have to make sure we have our accurate thinking. If the problem is caused by a nerve that controls the stomach not producing enough stomach acid, if you take an antacid, you're reducing the amount of acid. Not because you don't have enough, because it's in the wrong place. And you get that hiatal hernia where your stomach gets jammed up and it's very uncomfortable, a lot of bloating and stuff. It's not good. Anyway, so if there's not enough stomach acid and you reduce it even further, then it causes even more problems. And that actually contributes to immune dysfunction as well. Because the immune system, that hydrochloric acid really is sort of our first barrier of defense. There's very few bacteria that can survive that. That's why any really good probiotic will be encapsulated. So it's enteric coated, means it can survive the stomach acid, and then it releases in an alkaline environment in your small intestine, and that's where all those gut bugs populate. So if that bone is off, pinches there, causes the stomach problem, take antacid, reduces the acid, makes the problem worse. Well, and then that carries down, because if you're reducing the acid, then you're not really digesting your food. Then your food goes to your small intestine undigested, and then you have a lot of fermentation, and you'll also have an immune response to that food, which left unchecked can sometimes turn into food allergies. That's why people that ate the same foods over and over and over, they develop an allergy to it. They stop eating it, they start eating something else that becomes their new favorite thing. And they eat that over and over and over and over, and eventually they develop an immunity to that as well, or an immune response to that. And over time, that can cause a lot of serious food problems. But what you notice is after about 6 months of not eating that thing, that your body can start to digest it again, because that immune response has been cleared. That's sort of just the normal function of your immune system. But take into consideration that this entire talk started off of a head injury, right? I had a lady that came to see me. She was 56 years old, looked very frail, had severe osteoporosis, like 80% or more demineralized. Her skeleton was a ghost. And obviously she was a little concerned about coming to a chiropractor, like, hey, you're not going to crush my bones, are you? And, I'm kind of a bigger guy, so I totally get it. So I reassured her that I do a lot of very low force techniques, super gentle stuff. I can do all the heavy duty stuff, but obviously my job is to help as many people as possible. So I have to be able to modulate my pressure, whether it's a baby or somebody with osteoporosis or somebody out of a fresh car accident, maybe somebody's inflamed, whatever, or all the way up to somebody who's really, really tough, really locked up, got to get in there and bust it loose. Anyway, so she was talking to me and she was explaining to me how she had osteoporosis, and then she had chronic anemia, and then she had, and I asked her, I said, do you get reflux? She's like, oh man, it's terrible. And she was on acid reducers for that, and she was concerned because she'd heard the report that the proton pump inhibitors actually they can cause kidney damage and liver damage and dementia, and she was all worried about that because she wanted to age gracefully and didn't want to have a lot of brain problems and stuff. So, and she had heard about me from a friend of a friend, so she was willing to give me a shot. And sure enough, I asked her, I said, when was your head injury? She's like, oh, I've never had a head injury. And I said, well, funny thing about a head injury, they're kind of hard to remember sometimes. She didn't think it was funny. Anyway, so I asked her, I said, think back, like way back. And it turns out when she was 5 years old, she fell out of a moving vehicle and smashed the side of her head into the ground. And the she went to the doctor. They said that she was all clear, everything was good, that she didn't have any swelling in the brain, didn't have anything that was life-threatening, which is great. And that's where they left it. They said, done. Well, flash forward 51 years, this lady's not been accumulating enough calcium in her skeleton to build a full skeleton, so she probably never really had strong bones throughout her lifetime. And that's part of the reason why she said she always felt a little sick and a little tired, is she was pretty much chronically anemic her whole life. So I hear stories like that, and it really makes me sad, because there are solutions. There are ways that we can help. There's things that we can do about it way early on. Like I make sure that, if parents have little kids, they know that they can benefit from getting adjusted to avoid a lot of those long, insidious, indirect symptoms of an injury. If something happens to you when you're 5, you don't want to find out about it when you're 25 and all of a sudden you're having problems, and now we're up against limitations of matter, like how much can you change in a short period of time and what's it going to take then. It's easier to fix it much earlier on so that it doesn't become sort of that compounded problem. What I think is interesting, and this is one of the things that's not really talked about, is that A lot of times Western medicine looks at things, and this is not me bagging on them, this is just their perspective. They look at things as life or limb, right? Will it threaten your life immediately, right? They just expect that at some point everybody's going to die, and it happens, right? Does it affect your immediate life or limb? Will it cause you any obvious long-term problems beyond what's normal? And in order for something to be wrong, it has to be qualified as wrong enough and the right kind of wrong to fit the category, so they can diagnose and they can treat it. Like obviously a broken bone where it's sticking out of your arm, that is very obvious, and that's really wrong, and they can fix it. But what they don't do so well with, and that's sort of my territory, right? Like I don't do great at their job, they don't do great at my job, and I'm cool with that because everybody stays in their lane. But the continuation of care is when we're not looking at something that's really very wrong, but there's something that's not quite right. And that is really the essence of an indirect or an insidious injury. And the hard part about it is it's very hard to connect it to what caused it, when it happened, or how to solve it until we really start to dig through the neurology, because the neurology is the system of control. And once we get that figured out, then we can start to really get things to come back to life. I see it happen all the time. Somebody comes in, doc, I got terrible neck pain. I adjust them a couple of times. They're like, hey, guess what? That reflux problem I was having is gone. Or, I stopped snoring. Or I don't have to get up in the middle of the night to pee 6 times anymore. Never once do they write that on their intake form. It always happens that it's kind of like by the way, or, I know this doesn't have anything to do with what's going on now, but there's this other problem and you're a doctor and you listen to me, so I'm going to tell you. So then I listen and I work my way through it and see if we can connect the dots and make sense out of chaos for them, and get them some results. So I think that all in all, that piece alone, that one little bit of accurate thinking where we're looking at not just the immediate problem, but what other things might be associated with that, other things that might not seem related that are, how do we make a good clinical picture out of that and then make action on that? And then really, at the end of the day, it's about results. So how do we get them to that point where they have the results they want? And I think that piece alone is super important. If you have anything that's like that, you want me to check it out, by all means, call my office. You can leave comments below asking questions. If you need me to go into some more detail, I can give you some information. I can't give you any medical advice over the internet, but obviously this will get you thinking. And if there's a healthcare professional in your area, if you're not local to where I'm at, you're more than welcome to put them in touch with me, and I'll share some information with them as much as I can, because obviously I'm here to help as many people as possible. So hope that helps. If you have any questions, leave them below. We'll get back to you, and stay tuned.